Stay tuned next for a CNN special report with Aaron Brown and Jeff Greenfield. This is now Aaron Brown's permanent time spot following this program every night. Is it difficult journalistically as an anchor reporter to just cover one story all the time?
Not yet, at least not on this one, because it keeps changing. So every day you come in and it's not the same story it was the day before. The only problem is that the number of missing, the number of dead, keep growing, and that makes the story more painful each day. But it's been anything but boring.
We officially welcome you into this time slot, Aaron. Go get them and give our best to Jeff, and we'll see you in New York late next week and see you tomorrow night.
Thank you, Larry. Look forward to it. And good evening again, everyone. New indisputable signs that life is returning to normal. At a meeting of the House Judiciary Committee today, the Republican chairman and the leader of the Democrats had a bit of a spat over how much time each side could have to speak. And over at the White House, the president's spokesman and the White House press corps sparred for a long while over the lack of information. Specifically, what is the evidence the administration has that Osama bin Laden was responsible for the terrorist attack? And in New York, at an intersection, a horn honked and the guy standing next to me turned to the offending driver and bellowed, "Hush up." Well, actually, those are my words, not his, but you get the idea. Normal, blessed normal. Of weightier matters today, the president this morning waged a financial war on terrorism. He froze the U.S. assets of suspected terrorists and delivered an ultimatum. If your nation does business with terrorists, you won't do business with the United States. Easy to say, tougher to do. And his Attorney General urged the Congress to adopt tough anti-terrorist measures, warning of a clear and present danger to Americans. Critics warn that civil liberty may be in jeopardy. And in New York, a mayor's race turned upside down. Papers say Rudy wants to run again. Mr. Giuliani's not saying, at least not yet. He says he's been too busy to think about it. The understatement of a lifetime. We'll touch on all of this tonight, beginning first with the President's Day. Early this morning, the President tried to drive a stake through the financial heart of the terrorist networks by freezing their assets in the United States. But even the President acknowledged there aren't many assets in the United States, and unless other nations and their banks go along, it will not mean a whole lot. We begin at the White House, and our senior White House correspondent, John King. John?
Well, Aaron, and the challenge of selling that plant to countries around the world, banking systems around the world, now falls to the Treasury Secretary, Paul O'Neill. He will be on a conference call first thing in the morning with leaders of the other G7 countries and the Secretary of State, Colin Powell. His task, convincing moderate Arab nations, especially Saudi Arabia, to tighten the financial noose on terrorism. Still, the President, as he celebrated this announcement in the Rose Garden today, called it the first strike in the war on terrorism. His weapon in the first round, a ballpoint pen.
The first target in the war on terrorism is money.
Today, we have launched a strike on the financial foundation of the global terror network.
The President signed an executive order freezing U.S.-held assets of 27 individuals and organizations, including Osama bin Laden, his al-Qaeda organization, sometimes called the Islamic Army, the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and the Wafa Humanitarian Group and the Al-Rashid Trust, nonprofit groups the White House says are fronts for terrorism. The order to freeze accounts went out to 5,000 banks in the United States first thing Monday. Hours later, the Attorney General asked Congress for the power to do more.
And we are in our legislation seeking to be able to seize the assets, not just to freeze them, not just to curtail activity, but to take those assets.
On the home front, the move is largely symbolic. A similar edict by the Clinton administration turned up little. But the Bush administration is providing the list to governments and banks around the world and asking them to follow suit, or else.
And it puts the financial world on notice. If you do business with terrorists, if you support or sponsor them, you will not do business with the United States of America.
Some governments first want proof of a bin Laden connection to the attacks, and Secretary Powell promised Sunday the administration would soon provide some. But Powell was forced to retreat a bit after the President made clear he felt no obligation to detail the evidence.
Most of it is classified, and as we look through it, we can find areas that are unclassified, and it will allow us to share this information with the public. We will do so. That would be our intent, but most of it is classified.
Prime Minister Jean Chrétien of Canada stopped by to give his public backing to the campaign. And in private, U.S. officials appealed for Canada to do a better job tracking the movements of suspected terrorists.
And tonight, the president sent to Congress the formal notification of the military deployment we have seen in recent days. Mr. Bush saying he was sending troops to several nations overseas. Also told the Congress additional deployments are likely. And in that letter to the Speaker and the President of the Senate, Mr. Bush saying he could not predict just now what would be the duration or the scope of the military campaign, although he did say America's war on terrorism is likely to be, quote, lengthy. Aaron?
John, quickly, it's going to be a battle getting information out of the White House, isn't it, on everything from the evidence they have to where the troops are going and everything else.
This is an organization, an administration that prides itself on secrecy. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has restricted information dramatically. I talked to a top aide to Secretary Powell today after that, shall we call it a mix-up over whether the United States would publish a white paper on this. He said the president pulled us back a little bit today. The president doesn't want to talk about this. Aaron?
John, thanks. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, tonight. This isn't the first time, as John mentioned, that the United States has announced it will freeze or try and seize the assets of people and countries it considers terrorists. Far from it. When those so-called Iranian students took hostages at the American embassy in Tehran, stopping the money was one of the few concrete actions President Jimmy Carter could accomplish. Today, just a bit over $23 million in Iranian assets still remain blocked, mostly in diplomatic property. After the Gulf War a decade ago, the United States froze Iraqi assets. Right now, there's a great deal of Iraqi money still under United States control. Well over $2 billion, in fact, which includes more than $500 million of Iraqi assets blocked in foreign branches of American banks. But it's far different and far less successful accounting when it comes to individual terrorists or terrorist groups. According to the most recent study, a study we've relied on in reporting these figures, the last time the U.S. blocked the assets of a terrorist group was 1995. President Clinton signed an order blocking assets of the radical Palestinian organizations Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. How much money did the Americans find? At the end of last year, a total of $17,000 was blocked in a single bank account in the United States. These numbers, incidentally, and a great deal more information come to us from a report delivered to Congress on terrorism. The delivery date? September 10th, a day before the awful disasters in New York and in Washington. The report estimated the likelihood of a terrorist attack by Osama bin Laden as, quote, extremely high.